Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Senior Project to Soc 499. This should be the last class you are taking in your sociology program. It is the capstone, and it is Senior Project is basically another word for your senior thesis. Excuse me. So, what I'm going to do in this video is tell you a little bit, give you a bit of an overview of what you're going to be writing over the next 8 weeks. You're going to be doing, of course, sociological research. And with this project, your senior thesis, you need to test hypotheses. And you'll be using peer-reviewed academic sources, like academic journals, American Sociological Association journals, that sort of thing, and written material with some non-academic sources, if providing examples to answer your research question or questions. Now, usually students keep it to one research question and maybe one or two hypotheses. Okay. So when you start thinking about what topic you would like to write about, you want to start with a general idea of interest. For instance, if you're interested in prejudice and intergroup relations, there's your general area of interest. Do some reading in the area, narrow your topic using the guiding principles that you're reading about in the week one course website. Excuse me, and develop a research question. Okay, and it has to be something that can be tested, such as does the digital divide in America, is it getting worse or is it getting better? Those are general research questions. Now, usually you want something that's a little bit more in depth because you're going to be formulating hypotheses and doing, looking at several different elements to this. So, that was just an example I'm throwing out. But develop a research question such as, do people who live in cities necessarily have worse troubles with certain, to have a higher stress levels, and how is that measured and that sort of thing. So you have to develop a very specific research question. So you would start with that general and then kind of whittle it down until you've got something that is testable. Then you review the relevant literature. So you're looking at studies on that topic. Do you have enough studies that you could actually pursue that topic for your paper? And then you formulate a hypothesis. And hypotheses are if-then statements, where they are basically a prediction of what you think the research is going to find. And you're not in trouble if you get to the end of your study and find out your hypothesis was disproved or partially proved instead of fully proved. The idea is not to be able to predict correctly everything. The idea is to ask a scientific question and then answer it objectively using the method, the scientific methodologies. Okay, as you are reviewing the literature, look for studies and data that you can use to test your hypotheses. You're doing all of this week, and you're in week one. So you're nailing down a topic, and you want to start organizing your materials and your writing. So start keeping these, studies that really stick out in mind. Write down the reference information so that you can find that study again very easily. If you're at a library, you can print it out, or at your computer and you're online with the NU library, you can print it out, or make sure that you can easily access that information again some other way. Chapter 1, there are 5 chapters to your senior thesis, your senior paper project, okay? The first is the introduction. Now, what you're doing in week 1 is nailing down the information that you're going to put in your introduction in week 2. So chapter 1 should start with a basic introduction. Like, this paper will address this research question, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we'll examine XYZ. Big mistake that a lot of people make is that they go off onto a very wide general topic in their introduction. The introduction should not be introducing the overall topic. It should be introducing the paper. So what you want to do with the introduction is start immediately with the purpose of the paper. Okay, we'll get into that a little bit more as we talk about chapter 1 in next week's video. You're also in chapter 1 going to include a problem statement. Why is this important? Why do we need to know this? You know, what is the situation that warrants looking into this? And again, always keeping it objective, of course. And then you're going to talk about your research hypothesis or hypotheses. In some cases, people will have more than one. That's chapter 1. And that's due in week 2. In week 3, chapter 2 is due. This is the longest chapter, usually, for most people, okay, by far. The literature review is a summary of the literature written about your topic, okay? But you're not summarizing the topic itself. You're not just, going off and talking about the topic. You are actually summarizing, giving a timeline of what study has been done, what research has been done, and what was found about your topic in the field of sociology or in related fields. It's usually best to write this in temporal order from the earliest research to the latest. And note, these are not the studies you'll use in chapter 3 and 4. All you're doing in the literature review is giving a general kind of a description of the research history of your topic. Okay? In chapter 3, you're looking at the methodology, and for each study you describe in chapter 3, you're going to be doing a full description that includes the setting, the description of the subjects, the description of the research instrument, how was this set up, description of the variables, independent variables being tested, and also what were the dependent variables, what were the outcome, and you'll go study by study. You usually pick about 3 to 5 studies to describe in chapter 3. This is the method by which you will test your hypotheses later. But what you're doing is describing to the reader what are the studies you're going to be using in chapter 4. This is chapter 3. This describes the studies. You'll be applying them in chapter 4. You're also going to include your description of terms, any of the terminology that's specific to the study of your topic. You also want to include, when you describe each study, you want to include the procedures that the researchers used and the limitations. For instance, did they only test people in the Indianapolis area, or did they only test Americans, or did they only test people in Northern California or something like that? In other words, look at limitations. Did they only test grad students who were desperate enough for the money to, for the $10 that they were paid for doing the study? That sort of thing, okay? Also, were the limitations of the study were there limitations in the experiment itself? Okay, we'll go into each of these each week. Chapter 4, and that will be due in week 5. This chapter establishes if the hypotheses were supported. Okay, so chapter 3 maps out the studies that you use and actually apply to the hypotheses in chapter 4. And chapter 4 gives kind of it's the climax of the paper. It basically tells you, yes, this hypothesis was proved or disproved or only partially proved. Okay, and you go study by study, just in the same order you did in chapter 3. You use research from studies described in chapter 3 to test your hypothesis or hypotheses one after the other. Okay, and it's organized by hypothesis. So testing, if you have more than one hypothesis, you first give a full description of the outcomes of testing hypothesis 1. Then you start over again with hypothesis 2. So you section out this chapter that way, okay? Now, in chapter 4, you want to include tables and charts if needed, if necessary, and if they illustrate your material that you made yourself. Now, if you include those, make sure you place them where you also describe what that data means. In other words, make sure the tables and charts have a purpose for being there. And the last chapter is chapter 5, where you have your discussions, your conclusions, and your recommendations. And that's literally the 3 sections of chapter 5. Your discussions, your conclusions, and your recommendations. That is what's due week 6. Week 7, you have your preliminary pages, your references pages, and your oral presentations due. So you'll have 3 things that you turn in that week. You will have your preliminary pages, and I'll describe those in a minute. You have your references pages, which are works cited. And then you also have a PowerPoint presentation that you used in your oral presentations, which you give that week as well, the beginning of week 7. Okay. What are your preliminary pages? Very briefly, of course, we'll go through this in week 7 a little bit more. You have your title page, your copyright page, if you plan to register a copyright, a dedication page, that's optional, acknowledgments, that's optional. If you'd like to include a table, you have to include a table of contents, sorry. If you have tables, include a list of tables. Okay. Okay. Whether you include just tables that you yourself make or tables that you've pulled from other sources. List of illustrations, if applicable, again. Charts and graphs and figures, if appropriate. If appropriate, and a list of symbols. A preface is optional. Abstract has to be there. Okay? Those are the preliminary pages. Oops, back it up here. Next is your title page. I want you to just give you an idea. That title page needs to be in APA style. And what I have here is just kind of a general example. But there's also, if you go to the course resources in your course website, you will find a template, an APA template that I made for you that you can use to kind of just guide you where you put your title page, your abstract, the main body of your paper, and then your sources. But going back to this again, we will visit this again when the week comes up that you're about to do this. You will have a video in week 7 to write your preliminary pages. This is literally the order in which those pages show up. So of course it starts with your title page. That's the front page of your entire paper, not chapter by chapter, just your entire paper. Then you have a table of content that gives the page numbers. Then you have your abstract, which is about 350 words. This should include a description of the research question, a brief description of the methodology, the major findings, and the major conclusions. Very simple. And you also want to include keywords in your abstract, of course. Optional pages are your copyright, your dedication, your acknowledgements, and your preface. And note that check the week 7 course page for the correct order for all of these things, okay? And also, of course, you'll have a video. If appropriate, you want to, in other words, if you have them, you need to have a list of, if you have a table or one or more, you need a list of tables. One or more illustrations, you need a list of illustrations. Same with figures, same with symbols. And then, of course, after the body of the paper, you have your references. This is due on a separate Word doc than the preliminary pages. And what you'll do is you'll put all of the chapters and this the preliminary pages and the references together in one large Word doc when you turn it in. But turning these in separately means that I can go through each and kind of take a look at specifically that particular portion of your paper. Okay, the oral presentation. This is very brief. You develop a PowerPoint presentation as if you were going to present it to the class, and that's exactly what you're about to do. You want up to about 8 to 12 slides. You don't need more than 12. And you don't need your literature review. We'll go through this in weeks. In week 6, you'll get a little information about this. But these should give highlights of what you'll cover. So they are not to be the text of your presentation. You can't do that in 10 minutes or less, okay? Use bullet points to highlight the main ideas, and the presentation should be no more than 10 minutes. So all you're doing is telling the class, what is your topic? What is your research question? What are your hypotheses or hypotheses? What were the outcomes of that study? And what were your conclusions, okay, and recommendations? So your oral presentation, very briefly, here is a list of things you'll want to cover in that oral presentation. Research question, basically the problem. The methodology, which if it is important to your research. Okay, usually you don't need to describe each of the studies you used. You can just kind of give a very general description of that. You don't have to go into incredible detail with that. Most important, of course, are the results and your analysis. And then you really want to push Chapter 5 hard in your oral presentation, because that's where you have your discussion, your conclusions, your recommendations. So Chapter 5 is going to be really important to your oral presentation. If you have any questions about this, please post them in the virtual office. But the main thing for this week, taking it bit by bit, is you want to come up with the very basics. You want that research question. You want your research hypotheses. You want to develop that basic overall concept. What is the theme of your paper? Okay, so start with the exercises, the discussion board on week 1. Take a look at what some of those interactive questions are asking, and the proposal that is due at the end of week 1. Okay, that proposal is due by Saturday night at midnight, or 11, I guess it's 11:59 to still be on Saturday. But you turn that in, and that gives me a very brief description of your proposal. Now, I would like during week 1, before you turn in that paper, to sit down with each of you in a live session, and nail down the topic. So please, once you have an idea, start emailing me. We will let's get together and start talking about this, okay? So start emailing me. We can go into the live session. You can propose the topic on the discussion board. But one way or the other, I need to talk with each of you, and we need to get things narrowed down and nailed down so that you have a topic that is doable in the time you have, and also is detailed and rich enough to give you plenty of content for your paper. Okay? So, again, welcome to the class, and I hope that you enjoy your senior project. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to post them on the virtual office or to email me. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great week.